Caution! The following video is an in-depth review of the TV series I'm currently reviewing, which means that there will be massive spoilers in the review. If you haven't seen this TV series yet, then please feel free to watch this TV series first before watching this video. However, if you have already seen this TV series, or you just want to know my thoughts on this TV series, then keep watching. 2013 was a huge turning point for my channel, as I started reviewing various TV shows and movies left and right, and it seemed like I had enough steam to review over 100 movies or TV shows if I wanted to. Unfortunately, that didn't really happen at the time, as I took a long break from reviewing movies and TV shows just so I could broaden my channel from just doing reviews to actually doing discussions about the movie and TV industry. Rugrats was among those reviews that I did way back in 2013, and it was actually one of my first reviews where I attempted to expand more on my thoughts about a TV series, though it only clocked in for over 8 minutes. At first, I was a bit hesitant about revisiting this series again, because I felt that I've said my piece about the series when I did my review of the show way back in 2013. But now that I got more ground to cover in various movies and TV shows I've watched, including the TV shows and movies I've reviewed in the past, this would allow me to rediscover some things from Rugrats that I didn't cover in my original review. The original review, that also contains screenshots from the show itself, is still up on my channel if you want to check it out. Let's see if this revisited review of Rugrats would beat the number of likes and views I got in my original review of the series. Rugrats was a phenomenon when it aired on Nickelodeon in 1991. It aired alongside two other Nicktoons, which were Doug and Ren and Stimpy, and the first three Nicktoons set the stage for the Nicktoons franchise that would continue running to this very day. But even though both Doug and Ren and Stimpy were very popular Nicktoons during their runs, they never quite reached the level of popularity that Rugrats would eventually eclipse in the 1990s. Rugrats was a unique show in that it was one of the few shows at the time that actually takes the premise about looking at the world through a baby's point of view and actually explores that notion. But before I go into this even further, I would like to give out a brief summary on the show, which is basically taken from my original review, since I think that the summary I gave out in the original review really explains what the show is all about very well. The show is about the adventures of the four main babies, who are Tommy Pickles, the leader of the group, Chucky Finster, the one who is scared of everything, and the twins Phil and Lil DeVille. Many of the episodes will focus on the four main babies going on various adventures that will either take place in their backyard or inside their houses as they let their imaginations run wild. Some other members of the group are Angelica Pickles, who is Tommy's older cousin and is often seen bullying the babies, and Susie Carmichael, who is the same age as Angelica but is much kinder towards the babies. Later during the show's run, two new characters were added to the cast, which were Dill Pickles, who is Tommy's new baby brother, and Kimmy Finster, who is Chucky's new stepsister. Even though I had a lot of favorite Nicktoons during the 1990s, Hey Arnold and the Angry Beavers in particular, Rugrats usually held a special place in my heart because it was one of the first Nicktoons that I was exposed to when I was little. As I mentioned before, Rugrats was a very unique show at the time that it first aired because it was a show about babies viewing the world in either an exciting or terrifying way, and the show did a really good job of portraying those aspects of the world from a baby's point of view. Another aspect that made Rugrats such a unique show was that the protagonists were actually babies rather than school-aged children or older. Prior to Rugrats, most of the shows that were geared towards children would have had child protagonists who are old enough to be in school or old enough to be in middle school. Rugrats, however, was a unique case where the main protagonists were babies. I'm pretty sure that the viewers who were watching the show at the time were scratching their heads and wondering how a show could be able to look at the world from a baby's point of view, especially when most babies are at that stage where their minds wouldn't be fully developed enough to take in the world around them. Well, Rugrats was somehow able to make that work by having the babies themselves use their imaginations to envision how they see the world for what it is. This not only made the babies more relatable to the audience, but it also accurately portrays how some young children would sometimes use their imaginations to see how the world is. Whenever young children use their imaginations, they tend to look at the world in a more fantastical way, which can produce both exciting and scary perceptions of the world at large, depending on how big their imaginations are. Adults, meanwhile, have a more realistic perception of the world as they see the world for what it is, and we get to see that with the babies' parents as we see them go on with their normal lives, while the babies are having imaginary adventures in their own backyard. In regards to the babies using their imaginations in each episode, I loved how the atmosphere of the earlier seasons had a more surreal and dreamlike feel, as it made the episodes even more interesting to watch. Even though we know that the adventures that the babies go on are just a part of their imaginations, and they are mostly going on these adventures in their backyards or in their playpens, it feels like we are actually inside the babies' imaginations and we are exploring the world through their eyes. Whenever the babies get into scary situations in their imaginations, such as the Dreamland episode where Chucky has a nightmare about Tommy turning to a bizarre creature and yelling out, "I'm not Tommy!" we actually get scared along with Chucky because of how that sequence just came out of nowhere, even though it was revealed to be a dream. The show makes good use of blurring the lines between reality and fantasy whenever the babies are using their imaginations, as it makes the show much more bizarre as they'll just throw dream sequences at you without any kind of warning. This always made the narrative much more interesting because it turns the expectations that we have for a particular scene on its head once they take a nosedive into the dream elements of that scene. Another aspect that I really enjoyed about the show was how the babies' imaginations tend to get so out of hand that they often misinterpret everything they see, mostly because Angelica fills their heads with scary scenarios for the situations they get involved in. This really shows that despite the fact that the babies try to explore the world around them, they are still too young to understand what the world is really like and are often prone to overreact to the smallest details in the situations that they are in and cause them trouble for themselves and sometimes for their parents. This is a good way to help explain to kids in the audience about learning to separate reality from fantasy and that they should study the world around them first before diving in headfirst into a situation that they are not well informed about. I also like the fact that the babies often mispronounce certain words, such as saying things like eggy explorers, which actually means explorers, because not only is it cute hearing them mispronounce these words, but it's a pretty good representation of how young children actually mispronounce certain words themselves. It actually reminded me of all those times when I was little that I often mispronounced certain words, especially my R's. Now let's talk about what made the meat of the series, and that were the characters themselves. The four main babies, Tommy, Chucky, Phil, and Lil, were very interesting characters as each episode is spent on the four of them going on various adventures and exploring the world at large, no matter how young they are. What I really enjoyed about these four characters were the relationships shared between them, as the show does a good job of showing how close they are to each other, and that no matter how scary the situation gets, even if it's in their imaginations for the most part, they will still remain together through thick and thin. Another aspect that I really enjoy about all the characters in the series, and it was something that I didn't quite pick up on the first time around, was that each baby seems to represent a different emotion that a child would experience whenever they are trying to understand the world they are living in. Tommy Pickles is shown as the leader of the group, and he often doesn't show any fear in the adventures that he and his friends go on, no matter how scary the situations would get. Tommy represents the kids who are curious about the world and are willing to dive into headfirst into a situation they are not familiar with because they want to learn more about the world around them. Chucky Finster is Tommy's best friend and is the scaredy cat of the group, since he normally doesn't want to go on any of the adventures that his friends want to go on. But despite that, there are times when he tries to conquer his fears to help out his friends whenever they are in trouble. Chucky is also the voice of reason for the group, since his cautious nature does help the other babies realize when they are in too deep into a situation, although that hasn't quite stopped the other babies from going on these adventures anyway. Chucky represents the kids who are scared of what kind of dangers the world can bring, since they don't understand about what the world's really like. They also tend to be more cautious about approaching a situation that they don't understand, rather than dive into headfirst into a situation. Other than Chucky, Phil and Lil were probably the most interesting characters to me because they are always seen together and also share similar likes with each other, as they both like to eat bugs, which is both disgusting and hilarious. They are also the most relatable characters to me because they are twins, and their relationship reminds me of my relationship with my twin sister, except me and my sister never ate bugs, as we are just as close as Phil and Lil are to each other. Phil and Lil represent the kids who are in the middle ground and don't really care about the dangers of the world. They just like to tag along with whatever activities their friends get into. Now that I've talked a bit about the four main babies, I would like to talk about the other characters in the series. The other main characters of the series tend to be a supporting cast of sorts to the four main babies, and I also found their relationships with the main four to be very interesting too. Angelica Pickles is Tommy and Dale's older cousin, and is one of the oldest characters of the baby cast. Unfortunately, Angelica is also the main bully of the series, as she spends most of her time scaring the babies by twisting their perceptions of how they see the world and turning them into something terrifying. For example, in one episode when Chucky gets a new bed and he was afraid of sleeping in it because he was not used to sleeping in a bed, Angelica comes up with a story about a monster living under his bed and that it would eat Chucky up if he so much as looks under his bed. Despite that, she's actually quite a complex character because even though she is the bully of the show, she doesn't really get away with her bullying. Whenever she takes a bullying a bit too far, she's often punished for her actions, whether it be through karma or her parents will actually wise up to her schemes. So, isn't it kind of weird to say that Angelica Pickles is actually my most favorite character in the entire series, despite the fact that she, bullies the other babies? I usually don't care for characters to bully other characters since I'm against bullying, But Angelica always strikes me as an interesting character because she isn't really that unlikable as a character. She actually has moments where she's just as upset or scared as the other babies, and it made me feel for her character at times. Susie Carmichael is another character who is much older than the 4 main babies and is around the same age as Angelica. She also serves as a polar opposite to Angelica, as while Angelica bullies the other babies and tries to scare them a few times, Susie is shown as being more nurturing towards the babies, and she usually tries her best to help the babies understand the world better while protecting them from Angelica's bullying. Both Susie and Angelica represent the older kids who either bully their younger siblings or cousins to make themselves feel more superior, Angelica, or the older kids who act as mentors for the younger kids and try to help them understand the world a bit better, Susie. Now let's talk about the 2 most controversial characters that were added in this series later on, Dale and Kimmy. There's actually not a lot to say about Dale Pickles, Tommy's new little brother, as he just spends most of the series being the butt of poop jokes, which was an issue that I took with the show in later seasons, but I'll explain about that later. However, I will say that Dale represents the younger sibling that an older sibling will occasionally take care of, and is essential to helping that older sibling learn more about the importance of responsibility. Kimmy Pfister is Chucky's new stepsister, and she is so usually getting along with Chucky, which is something I found to be very refreshing, since it's rare that you see TV shows show step families in a positive light. Thanks, Cinderella, for making people think that having step families is a negative thing. Also, as some fans have pointed out, Kimmy does seem like a female version of Tommy, as she is also brave whenever they go on their adventures. Kimmy represents the kids who have to deal with either being in a new environment or in a new family, and has to learn to adjust to these changes. Okay, so now that I finally did my long assessment on each of the baby characters, let's talk about the adults of the show. The parents in the show were very interesting, as it was stated that they are actually new parents, meaning that this series explores how each parent are trying to do their best and taking care of their children while learning how to be better parents. All of the parents in the show seem to be unaware of the adventures that their kids go on, since they are either too busy to attend to their kids, Drew and Charlotte, or are still trying to understand their kids by reading lots of child care books, Stu and Dee Dee. Despite their faults of being slightly inattentive to their kids' adventures, all the parents in the show truly do care for their children, and they will try to either discipline them if they step out of line, or comfort them whenever they get into situations that would terrify them. They also serve as that break into reality whenever the babies are using their imaginations to envision the way they see the world. Whenever the babies get into situations they don't understand, the adults are usually there to help them cope with the situation and explain to them about what is really happening in that situation, making the baby see the world for what it really is, a little at a time. Now, if there was a problem that I had with this series, it would start with the later seasons. The main thing that I had an issue with in the later seasons was that the show seemed to lose that surreal and dreamlike feel that the early episodes had. That was one of the main reasons why I liked the show in the first place, because it felt like we were inside the babies' imaginations due to the surreal feel of their environments. When they dropped that surreal quality into the show in the later seasons, it made the show seem so generic, and it was often hard for me to get back into the series at that point. Also, this is around the same time that Dale was introduced into the cast, and that was the point where I stopped watching the show altogether. I personally don't think that Dale and Kimmy were the problems with the later seasons per se, but it seemed like the moment that co-creator Paul Germain, who created the show along with Arlene Klasky and Gabor Csupo, left the show to work on Recess, the show sort of lost its humor and surreal quality that made it so good in the first place. It's also kind of hard to say where the show should have originally ended. Should it have ended in 1994 when the show was canceled the first time? Should it have ended after the first movie, the Rugrats movie? Or should it have ended after the All Grown Up special? To me, the show should have ended after the All Grown Up special because this would have been the perfect ending for the series. Seeing the Rugrats looking forward to growing up and therefore putting their adventures behind them as they want to see the world for what it is would have been a great way to end the series, with the Rugrats finally maturing as characters and looking forward to their futures. The original Rugrats series ran for 9 seasons with a total of 172 episodes, which at the time that it aired was the longest running Nicktoon, at least until SpongeBob SquarePants came along. Notice that I just said the original series. That's because the moment that I was writing this review, Nickelodeon had just announced that they are planning on making a 26-episode revival of the series and are making another Rugrats movie in 2020. I'm actually glad that I waited to make this review because I would have missed that announcement and I wouldn't be able to talk about it in my review. I will admit that I'm a bit curious to see what they are exactly going to do with the franchise moving forward. While I'm happy to see Rugrats finally come back to TV after all these years, I thought that they had a pretty good run originally, with over 9 seasons worth of episodes, 2 spin-offs under his name, and 3 movies beforehand. So what more can they do with the franchise at this point? I just hope that the 26 episode revival has the same surreal and dreamlike quality that the early seasons had, and even have some of that signature adult humor that the early episodes also had. As for the movie coming out in 2020, I'm not that thrilled about the movie being a live-action CGI hybrid movie, because I would have preferred it to be a traditionally animated film that's faithful to the original series, just like the first 3 movies were. I am interested in seeing how both the 26 episode revival series and the movie would turn out, as I hope they do the series some justice. Overall, I'm giving Rugrats a thumbs up. This was a fantastic series that really explores the concept of imagination through a child's perspective, and how that imagination can sometimes influence how a child sees the world. I would highly recommend the series to anyone who also has a child who has an overactive imagination and wants to see a series that gives an interesting insight into the world from a child's point of view. Hope you enjoyed my review of Rugrats. A meeting is being held at Nickelodeon, and they are discussing about what to do about the Rugrats All Grown Up special. And the meeting probably went something like this. Hey you guys, the Rugrats All Grown Up special had a very positive reception. You know what this means, don't you? This means that we should make a spin-off series called All Grown Up. That's fine, I guess. I mean, the All Grown Up special was cool and all, but when did we ever say anything about wanting a spin-off series for Rugrats? Why are you making a spin-off series about the Rugrats being preteens? Money? Yeah, okay. This video was requested to me by Laura on Duty, and if you want to request a movie or TV series for me to review for the Reviews 2.0 series, then please feel free to comment down below. Many years ago, I did a rant video about All Grown Up. It was during my early years on YouTube, as you could tell by how low my voice recording was on that video due to me not having a webcam at the time. I was actually surprised with how many likes and views that particular video got, despite the fact that that video was only 3 minutes long and the recording was horrible. While I like some of the points that I made in that video, I always felt that I could have better expressed my feelings about All Grown Up through a review rather than through a rant video. I only did a rant video about All Grown Up at the time because everyone else was doing it, and I figured that I might as well do a rant video too. But honestly, I never completely hated the show, and it did have some good moments. However, it did have a lot of issues that I will talk about much further in this review. So before I go into what I liked and hated about the show, I would give out a brief summary of the show. This show takes place 10 years after Rugrats, and it basically has the same Rugrats characters as preteens. In this show, Tommy is aspiring to be a filmmaker, Chucky is still as neurotic and awkward as he was in the original series, Phil is still about the same, but Lil is much more feminine than in the original series, Kimmy is much snarkier, and Dill is now the strange yet lovable kid. Susie is aspiring to be a singer, and Angelica is trying to be popular, although she is failing at that. Now, as I mentioned before, I didn't completely hate the show, but there were some things that made the show a bit bland at times. But before I go into that, let's try to talk about some of the things I did like about the show. First off, I do like the premise of the show. I mean, who wouldn't want to see the Rugrats being older? That's a concept that did interest me when the show was first announced, and I wanted to see what the Rugrats would have been like if they were older. And the show did a decent enough job at showing us just how much the Rugrats had changed over the years. When the Rugrats were babies, they often viewed the world with innocent wonder, and they would use their imaginations to have a better understanding of the world that they live in. But in All Grown Up, the characters are a bit different, and that is because they are looking at the world the way it is. And it's also because they started to experience more things as preteens than they ever did as babies. I did like the fact that the characters' personalities had changed over the years, since it realistically shows that people can change over the years, especially if that person had experienced so many things during their lives. Many of the Rugrats characters have changed their personalities over the years, although not by too much. Like for instance, while Tommy is still the same brave boy that he was as a baby, he is much more cautious about his actions than he was as a baby. And while Chucky is still neurotic like he was as a baby, he's much more assertive when he's older and will speak up his mind when the situation calls for it. However, the characters who had the biggest personality changes were Lil, Angelica, and Dill, as they are not quite the same characters that they were in the original series. Lil acts much more feminine here than she did in the original series, and Angelica is much nicer here than she was in the original series, although she still has moments where she's the bully to the other kids. And I can actually relate to Phil and Lil having more different personalities from each other when they got older, because I have a similar experience between me and my twin sister. Me and my twin sister used to do a lot of the same things together when we were little, but as we both got older, we started having interests in different things. Now, me and my twin sister are still very close to each other, but the fact that we developed different interests as we got older is a bit natural for anyone who is growing up. I actually expected these characters to have different personalities from the original series because of course they are much older. So therefore, once they see the world for what it really is, they will be experiencing the highs and lows of real life that would change them forever. And now the characters that I want to talk about are Dale and Kimmy themselves. Dale and Kimmy were often regarded as the most controversial characters in the original series, because they both happened to show up when the show was going down in quality. But luckily, this show made both Dale and Kimmy into the most interesting characters in the cast. Dale is shown as being the lovable weird kid who would do odd activities like walking backwards on Backwards Day or believe in aliens. I love this new interpretation of Dale because I always felt that he didn't really bring anything to the story of the original series except for poop jokes. Here, Dale brings in some weirdness to the series, and he was easily the most entertaining character in the series. And then there's Kimmy herself. In the original series, Kimmy seems like the female version of Tommy Pickles, but here, she's a lot more independent and will speak out her mind on whatever issue comes up. I really love this version of Kimmy, as her snarky personality makes her into a really interesting character, even if there were moments where Kimmy can be a bit bratty at times. There were a couple of episodes that I did like from this show. Like, one of my favorite episodes from the series was Petition This, where Kimmy was holding a petition to ban cell phones from school, but Angelica didn't want that to happen, so she started a petition of her own to keep the cell phones at the school while making Chucky a part of her team. Now, while I look back at this episode and I think to myself about what would have happened if the kids actually needed their cell phones in case of an emergency, I love the fact that this episode showcased Kimmy's determination and reaching for her goals, and I really love the friendship shared between her and Susie. I also love the fact that this episode showcased just how much Kimmy and Chucky really cared about each other, even if they occasionally argue with each other throughout the series. This was one of those rare examples where the show had well-written episodes that not only captures the situation that a preteen or a teenager might find themselves in, but how emotionally draining it could be for that person to pursue their goals. Now that I talked about the things that I liked about the show, I would like to talk about some of the issues that I have with this show. And man, do I have quite a bit to talk about. Even though the premise of the show was interesting, there were a few things that bothered me. First off, even though the idea about the Rugrats being put into more normal slice-of-life situations was interesting, the show was pretty bland for the most part. In my original rant video, I had mentioned that this show wasn't as outstanding as Invader Zim and Avatar: The Last Airbender. Now, while I do enjoy watching both Invader Zim and Avatar: The Last Airbender, it felt like I was comparing All Grown Up to two other shows that were completely different from it. Invader Zim was a science fiction series, while Avatar: The Last Airbender was an adventure and fantasy series. All Grown Up, meanwhile, was neither of those. So I guess the Nicktoons that I should be comparing the show to are As Told by Ginger, Doug, and Hey Arnold, which are all slice-of-life shows. Anyway, I think that the main issue with the show is that it has no idea what kind of show it wanted to be. Did it want it to be a straight-up dramatic series, or did it want it to be a more comedic and sometimes bizarre series? Now, there's nothing wrong with the show having a mixture of drama and comedy, as I personally think that those are the best types of shows when done properly. But it's like this show either wanted to be serious and realistic like As Told by Ginger, or be dramatic but have some humor like Doug and Hey Arnold. I had complained before my original rant video about how the show seems to have the same plot lines from other slice-of-life shows, like how most of the situations that the Rugrats get into deal with either doing petitions, dating other people, and other growing pains that a preteen or teenager has to go through. Now, don't get me wrong, these are situations that a preteen or teenager would naturally go through, and the show does do a good job of showcasing these struggles. However, I just wish that the show took a more creative approach to these situations. I had mentioned before in my original rant video that I thought that the show could have been more like The Adventures of Pete and Pete and Hey Arnold, meaning that the show could have some surreal moments to balance out the dramatic aspects of the series. But now that I thought about it, while I still agree that the show could have been a bit more like Hey Arnold, I do think that I might have been stretching a bit too far when I said that it should be a bit like The Adventures of Pete and Pete. Now, don't get me wrong, The Adventures of Pete and Pete was a fantastic show, but it is also weirder in tone than Rugrats was. If there was a show that I think that All Grown Up could have taken some cues from, it would be Scrubs. In Scrubs, the main character JD would occasionally have some silly and bizarre daydreams about the situations that are happening to him in real life. One memorable episode for me was when Carla was complaining to JD about her day. JD then has a daydream where he imagines Carla opening up her head and a beam of light comes out of it. The beam of light that came out of Carla's head then proceeded to melt up JD's face in a really graphic way. If this sounds really weird to you, then that's alright because this moment really was that weird. Anyway, All Grown Up could have done a similar thing where the now preteen Rugrats would occasionally have weird daydreams about the real life situations they are going through. This would not only bring in some creativity to the show, but this would also go hand in hand with the imagination aspect of Rugrats. You can have the Rugrats characters have brief imagined spots to deal with the situations that they are going through, but due to the characters being older, they would be very aware of the situations around them while having these strange imagined spots. Now, even though these are just some random ideas that I'm throwing around, this proves to me that the show could have been more creative. The reason why Rugrats was such a huge success was because at the time, there was no other show that had talking babies. And it was rare at the time to have a show where we are looking at the world from a baby's point of view. Even though All Grown Up featured the same Rugrats characters, the situations that the characters go through are still the same situations that I see played out in a lot of other teen shows. Another issue that some people have with this show that I wanted to talk about is whether or not the characters are acting their ages. The Rugrats are now preteens in the show, but it seems like that some of the situations that they go through, like dating other people, is something that teenagers would do. Now, I personally can't say that half of the things that the Rugrats got into would be considered too mature for them as preteens, because I think it all depends on the child and at what point in their lives were they exposed to such mature situations. So you could say that in this world, the Rugrats themselves were exposed to various things when they were babies that should have happened to them when they were older. Like, for example, getting lost in the woods in the Rugrats movie would have been something that either a preteen or adult would go through, not babies. And you could say that that experience had taught the Rugrats about the harsh realities of life at an early age. And the last issue that I have with this series, and this is just something personal for me, is that they use the same voice actors for the Rugrats themselves. Now, don't get me wrong, I love the voice actors from the original series, but I always felt that because the Rugrats are much older in the series, they should have older sounding voices, not the same voices that they had as babies. In my original rant video, I had made a statement that went like, "Oh, they are just babies in the bodies of 10-year-old kids." And that statement pretty much sums up my feelings about all this. Personally, I think that it would have been best if the preteen Rugrats were being voiced by actual preteens, like what they did with Hey Arnold. At least I could buy into the fact that the Rugrats are now actually preteens. All Grown Up ran for 5 seasons with a total of 55 episodes. That's actually not so bad for a spin-off series, although it didn't run nearly as long as the original series. It's also worth noting that All Grown Up was the only spin-off of one of the original 3 Nicktoons, which were Doug, Rugrats, and Ren and Stimpy, to air on Nickelodeon, since both Doug and Ren and Stimpy spin-offs are aired on other channels. Overall, I'm giving All Grown Up a question mark. What is the question mark rating, you ask? Well, the question mark rating means that the show is average. It's not terrible, but it's not that good either. So in the case of All Grown Up, I don't think that this show was that terrible. There were some good moments in the show, and I like the fact that we get to see the Rugrats as much older characters. But on the other hand, I felt that the show could have been a bit more creative with its premise, and not try so hard to be like the other teen shows that were aired at the time. If the show was a bit more original in executing its premise, then it probably would have been a memorable spin-off series instead of being an average spin-off series. Hope you enjoy my review of All Grown Up. Another meeting is being held at Nickelodeon, and they are discussing about doing another spin-off series for Rugrats. And the meeting probably went something like this. "Hey you guys, since Rugrats is becoming a huge hit for the channel, we should make a spin-off series for the show." "I know! Why don't we do a spin-off series where Angelica and Susie go to preschool and call Angelica and Susie's Preschool Daze?" No! We are not going through this again. It may have worked for All Grown Up, but we don't need another spin-off series for Rugrats. Well, we could rename it Rugrats Preschool Daze. But a spin-off series about Angelica and Susie going to preschool when that was already done in the original series? Maybe we should scrap it. Exactly. This video was requested to me by Laura on Duty, and if you want to request a movie or TV series for me to review for the Reviews 2.0 series, then please feel free to comment down below. So way back in 2013, I did a TV show review on one of the spin-off series made for Rugrats called Angelica and Susie's Preschool Daze, which was also known as Rugrats Preschool Daze. Out of all the spin-offs that was made for Rugrats, which were just 2, this series was the lesser known of the 2 as it only ran for 4 episodes. 4 episodes! That's the record for the shortest running Nicktoon on the planet so far. Anyway, it didn't help that it was nearly impossible to track down these episodes since Nickelodeon rarely ran the show on its own network. Luckily though, Paramount was able to release all 4 episodes of the series on the Tales from the Crypt movies that were released on DVD, which included Snow White and 3 Jacks and the Beanstalk. I actually owned the Snow White one, and that was how I was able to find out about this series. The history behind this show was pretty interesting to me. The show was actually pitched to Nickelodeon in 2001, and it was meant to be the first spin-off series for Rugrats. but when the All Grown Up special proved to be so successful, Nickelodeon decided to focus all its attention on the All Grown Up spin-off series, and Angelica and Susie's Preschool Daze was put on hold. It wasn't until 2008 that Angelica and Susie's Preschool Daze finally premiered on Nickelodeon, and it proved to be a massive failure. This was probably due to the fact that at this time, Rugrats was waning in popularity, and SpongeBob SquarePants had become the new popular Nicktoon for the network. So on face value, how did this show ended up failing? Well, I have a few theories that's mostly related to the quality of the show itself rather than any outside factors. But before I get into my thoughts about this show, I would like to give out a brief summary about this show. And it's pretty brief because this show didn't last long enough to have a more developed story. The premise of the show is based off a few episodes from the original series where Angelica and Susie were going to preschool, and the show itself was basically about Angelica and Susie's adventures in preschool while they deal with other characters like Harold, Savannah, and their teacher Miss Weimer. See? I told you this was going to be a brief summary. Anyway, I had mentioned before that I had reviewed the show several years ago during my requested videos week, and now that I look back at my original video of this review, with a bit of dread because of how faulty my equipment was at the time, I found out that my opinions about the show have remained the same. So allow me to go into more detail about that. But a bit of a warning here. This review will probably be very short compared to my other videos since there's not much to say about the show since it only ran for 4 episodes. But I will try my best to reach that special 10-minute mark for this video. So let's start with the positive things first. First off, I did like the premise of the show. Even though we have already seen Angelica and Susie as toddlers in the original series, it was quite interesting seeing Angelica and Susie go into preschool. Normally in the original series, we would see Angelica and Susie interacting with the babies, but in this series, we get to see Angelica and Susie interacting with other kids their ages. And this show did a good job of showcasing the relationships that Angelica and Susie had with their preschool teacher and the other kids. I also like the fact that the show tried to expand more on Angelica and Susie's relationship with both Savannah and Harold. If you had seen All Grown Up, you'll notice that both Savannah and Harold had a much larger role in that series than they had in the original series. It was nice seeing how both Savannah and Harold were like in preschool and how their relationships with Angelica and Susie had developed over the course of the franchise. Savannah is still shown as being the rival towards Angelica, and she still tries to trick Angelica into doing things that she isn't supposed to do. Like in one episode, she tricks Angelica into playing the part of the tree because both she and Angelica wanted to play Martha Washington in the school play. And then you have Harold, who's like the third wheel in the group as he just seems to go along with whatever plans that Angelica, Susie, or Savannah have cooked up for the situation. I also like the fact that Angelica, Susie, Harold, and Savannah still remain about the same characters that we saw in All Grown Up. Even though in All Grown Up they are much older and have experienced the world a bit more, they still have some aspects of their personalities that never completely change. Angelica and Savannah are still uptight and temperamental, while Susie is still the voice of reason. It shows that even though you are much older and you have experienced more of the world, you may still have some old habits that will never completely go away. And now I would like to talk a bit about Angelica and Susie's preschool teacher, Miss Weimer. Miss Weimer seems like a pretty interesting character as she is shown as constantly being a nervous wreck and trying to get through her days the best way that she can. I do often wonder about why Miss Weimer is such a nervous wreck in this series, as the series never really explored her backstory. I mean, sure, it can be really difficult to teach children at times, especially if they are notorious troublemakers, but I often wonder if Miss Weimer had suffered a nervous breakdown at some point in her life to make her to such a nervous wreck. Though, to be fair, the show only lasted for 4 episodes, so there wasn't enough time to explore these characters' backstories. I also like the humor of the show as it seemed to harken back to the early years of Rugrats, although it's not as dark as some of the humor from the earlier seasons. I had complained in my original review of the series that I found the humor to be dumbed down due to them relying more on gross out humor and not incorporating enough jokes that would make adults laugh. Well, 2013 me? I may have to disagree with you a bit there. While this series does have a fair share of gross out humor, I actually found myself chuckling at some of the dialogue from the characters. It seems like the characters are self-aware of their situations and make light of their situations, and I really enjoy seeing that type of humor in this series. Another thing that I liked about the show was that they used the same voice actors, in this case Cheryl Chase as Angelica and Cree Summer Susie, from the original series to voice the characters. I had complained in my review of All Grown Up about how using the same voice actors from the original series had made the characters sound like babies in the bodies of 10-year-old kids. I think that should become a meme for my videos whenever I'm mentioning All Grown Up. I still think that they should have used real kids to voice the characters in their preteen years. However, in the case of Angelica and Susie's preschool days, using the same voice actors actually worked because Angelica and Susie are still toddlers in the series like they were in the original series. Now that I talked about the things that I liked about the show, I would like to talk about some of the problems that I had with the show. The main problem that I had with the show was that I felt that there were some aspects of the premise that were similar to the original series. In the original series, Angelica and Susie were toddlers, who would occasionally use their imaginations to figure out a situation, just like the other babies did. Although since they are much older than the other Rugrats, they tend to know a bit more about the world than the babies do. In this series, while Angelica, Susie, and their classmates didn't really use their imaginations much, this is still a show about young kids trying to understand the world that they live in. Also, another big issue with this series is that it premiered after All Grown Up, and because All Grown Up had already established the relationships between Susie, Angelica, Savannah, and Harold, it felt pointless to see how these four characters had developed their relationships that would continue through their preteen years. If this show had premiered before All Grown Up, like it was originally planned, then it would have been a great bridge between the original series and All Grown Up, as it would have established the relationships between Angelica, Susie, Harold, and Savannah early on, and we would have seen just how much of their relationship with each other had changed over the years. Another issue that I had with the show was the new designs for the characters. I honestly don't know why they changed the designs for the characters in the series, although I'm guessing it's because they didn't want to confuse the viewers with the actual preschool Daze episode from the original series. But the characters look a bit too odd in this series, which is saying something since Rugrats tends to have an odd art style of his own. I didn't like the fact that the characters' eyes were a bit shaded, and the fact that they have eye colors made them look even weirder. The only thing that I liked about the new art style was that the colors were much brighter compared to the original series, and it made the environments really stand out. Angelica and Susie's Preschool Daze ran for one season with a total of 4 episodes, making this one of the shortest running Nicktoons on the channel. It's kinda ironic that this was a spin-off series for Rugrats, since Rugrats is one of the longest running Nicktoons on the network, at least until SpongeBob SquarePants came along. Overall, I'm giving Angelica Susie's Preschool Daze a question mark, which means an average rating. I thought that the premise of the show was pretty interesting, and it was great seeing Angelica, Susie in preschool and interacting with other kids their ages. Also, I thought that the humor was pretty spot on, even if there were a couple of gross moments that made me cringe a bit. But I felt that the show had premiered on Nickelodeon a little too late, and that it was a bit pointless for the show to be trying to develop both Angelica and Susie's characters. Not only did we already see Angelica and Susie in preschool in the original series, but the other spin-off series All Grown Up had already established Angelica, Susie, Harold, and Savannah's relationship with each other. If this show had been the first spin-off series made, like how it was originally intended, then things would have been a lot more different. So how could we improve this show? Simple. Make the series into a reboot, or into a revival, or whatever Nickelodeon wants to do with this franchise in the near future, and make the Rugrats themselves into preschoolers while Angelica and Susie are in kindergarten. It would be a different experience for the characters as they would have to go to school and deal with other kids while still trying to understand the world for what it is. Hope you enjoyed my review of Angelica and Susie's Preschool Daze. And bam! I finally reviewed all of the TV shows in the Rugrats franchise. I never in a million years would have guessed that this would happen. I usually have a rough time in trying to review all of the movies and TV shows in one franchise. So what's next then? Is there anything else in the Rugrats franchise that I need to review? Ah yes, the movies. I can't wait to sink my teeth into those soon. I'll see you guys next time for another Rugrats review video. Now it's time for... So if you like Angelica Susie's Preschool Daze, then I would highly recommend Rugrats. It's the show that started the franchise, and it's a great introduction to the baby characters. If you like another spin-off that featured the Rugrats, then I recommend All Grown Up. It features the Rugrats characters as preteens. And if you like another Nicktoon that has a school setting, then I highly recommend Hey Arnold. Psst. Hey you. Have you been enjoying the Reviews 2.0 videos? Want to get an added bonus for viewing these videos? Like getting early access to these videos before they are released on YouTube? Or being able to request what movies and TV shows I should review next? Then please feel free to support these videos through my Patreon account. Check out all of the tier titles on my account and choose which tier title you want to be known as. You could become a new member on the block, an early bird, be a part of the future Bunch team, a backstage passenger, an animation superstar, and last but not least, the honorary supreme. So show off your tier title name to the world once you support the Reviews 2.0 videos through Patreon.